They called me the spreadsheet ghost because they thought I did not exist. The day they mocked my mother's ancient bag, they never guessed it held the keys to buying 51% of the company. If you have ever been overlooked, listen closely. With just one sentence in a boardroom, I made a CEO lose his chair and turned that old purse into the symbol of the cleanest financial coup you will ever hear. My name is Alice Hughes. I am 39 years old, and for the last 10 years, I have been the senior risk strategist at Summit Bridge Equity in Chicago. To the men who stride across the trading floor in their Italian loafers. However, I have another name. They call me the spreadsheet ghost. They whisper it near the water cooler and chuckle over their craft beers after work. They think the nickname is clever. They believe they call me that because I am pale, quiet, and haunt the freezing cold corridor next to the server room. They are wrong. I am a ghost because, to them, I do not actually exist until something goes wrong. The Summit Bridge office was designed to intimidate. It was a glass kingdom perched 40 floors above the gray slush of the Chicago winter. The main trading floor was an open-concept theater of aggression, smelling of ozone, expensive cologne, and anxiety. It was a sea of charcoal gray vests and dual Bloomberg terminals, populated by men who spoke in decibels rather than sentences. They shouted about alpha, beta, and yield spreads, their voices overlapping in a cacophony that sounded like money being made or lost. Down in the parking garage, a fleet of leased BMWs and Audis sat waiting, gleaming physical manifestations of bonuses that had not yet been earned. My world was different. I did not get a view of Lake Michigan. My office was a small, glass-walled box tucked away in the back corner, directly adjacent to the main server farm. The constant, low-frequency hum of the cooling fans was my only company. It was always 65 degrees in my office, a temperature chosen to keep the machines happy, not the humans, while the traders lived in the noisy present, chasing the second-by-second ticks of the market. I lived in the future. I built models. I stress-tested scenarios. I looked at the beautiful, terrifying architecture of data that held this entire glass castle together. I was the one who checked the foundation while they threw parties on the roof. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I saw the crack in the foundation. I was running a Monte Carlo simulation on our credit portfolio, specifically the new tranche of corporate debt and high-yield junk bonds that Summit Bridge had been aggressively buying up for the last 2 quarters. The screen flickered with thousands of iterations, lines converging and diverging like veins. The result was a singular bright red percentage that made my stomach drop. The firm was over-leveraged. We were exposed, not just slightly exposed, but catastrophically vulnerable. We were effectively pumping liquidity into companies that were already on life support, betting that interest rates would stay flat forever. My model showed that a shift of just 50 basis points from the Federal Reserve would not just hurt our returns, it would trigger a margin call cascade that would wipe out nearly $80 million of capital. It was a mathematical certainty masquerading as bad luck. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the mesh digging into my spine. I adjusted my glasses. I was wearing a simple navy cardigan over a white blouse, clothes bought from a department store rack 3 years ago. I did not dress for the runway. I dressed for the cold of the server room. I looked at the numbers again. The problem with data is that it does not care about your optimism. It does not care about your quarterly bonus. It simply is. I needed to present this to the investment committee. The committee was led by Lawson Pike. Lawson was our CEO, a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that produced Fortune 500 executives. He had the silver hair, the capped teeth, and the perpetual tan of a man who spent more time on golf courses in Florida than looking at balance sheets. Lawson was a master of the corporate performance. He could go on CNBC and speak for 5 minutes without saying a single substantive thing, using words like synergy and paradigm with the confidence of a preacher. Then there was Tyler Crane. Tyler was 30 years old, our new golden boy. He had arrived 6 months ago, straight from a prestigious business school where his father had conveniently donated a new library wing. Tyler was loud. He wore bespoke suits that were just a little too tight and talked incessantly about crypto, blockchain, and disruption. To Tyler, I was an artifact. He treated me with the polite condescension one might reserve for an elderly aunt who still uses a flip phone. The weekly strategy meeting was held in the main boardroom, a space dominated by a long table made of reclaimed wood that probably cost more than my annual salary. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city I could not afford to live in comfortably. I walked in 5 minutes early, clutching my leather folio. I always printed my reports. I liked the feel of paper. It was harder to ignore than an email attachment. Lawson arrived 10 minutes late, smelling of espresso and arrogance. Tyler followed close behind, laughing at something on his phone. They sat down, and the air in the room shifted. The other junior executives leaned forward, eager to bask in the glow. Lawson did not look at me. He tapped the table twice. Let us get started. People, markets are green. I want to keep them that way. What have we got? After 20 minutes of back-patting and ego-stroking about our tech positions, Lawson finally waved a hand in my direction. Alice, risk, keep it brief. I have a lunch at the club at noon. I stood up. I did not project my voice like Tyler. I did not need to. I placed the printed charts in front of Lawson and Tyler. I have identified a critical vulnerability in the Summit Yield Alpha Fund. I said, my voice steady. We are currently holding 30% of the portfolio in unrated corporate debt. My stress tests indicate that the correlations between these assets are tightening. If the Fed signals a rate hike next month, which the bond market is pricing in at 60%, our liquidity position will evaporate. We are looking at a potential drawdown of $80 million in 48 hours. The room went silent. For a second, the only sound was the distant hum of the servers and the wind against the glass. Lawson did not pick up the chart. He did not even look at the red lines I had painstakingly highlighted. He was looking at his phone, his thumb scrolling rhythmically. Tyler, however, let out a short, sharp laugh. He picked up my report, glanced at it, and tossed it back onto the table as if it were a fast food wrapper. Alice, 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 Tyler said, shaking his head with a pitying smile. This is exactly what I was talking about. Lawson, this is legacy thinking. I stiffened. The math is not legacy. Tyler, it is reality. The leverage ratios are unsustainable. Tyler leaned back, clasping his hands behind his head. You are looking at historical data. You are thinking like someone traumatized by 2008. The market structure has changed. We are in a supercycle. Capital is cheap. If we pivot to defensive assets now like you are suggesting, we leave $20 million of upside on the table this quarter. Are you going to be the one to tell the limited partners we missed our benchmark because our risk officer is afraid of her own shadow? I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I kept my face impassive. It is not fear. It is prudence. We are picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. We need to unwind the leverage and move into treasury bonds. Lawson finally stopped scrolling. He looked up. His eyes glazed over with boredom. He looked at Tyler, then at me. We are not unwinding anything, Lawson said, his voice flat. He checked his watch. Tyler makes a good point. Alice, you are too conservative. This is a bull market. We need to be aggressive. We cannot let old fears hold back the future. But Lawson, I started. The numbers. Lawson held up a hand. The diamond ring on his pinky finger caught the harsh fluorescent light. Enough. We are increasing the leverage on the yield fund. Tyler has a new derivative strategy to hedge the tail risk. We are going with that. He pushed my report away from him. It slid across the polished wood and teetered on the edge of the table. Next item, Lawson said. I sat down. My hands were trembling slightly under the table, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. They were walking off a cliff, and they were laughing at the only person holding a map. Tyler smirked at me across the table, a look of triumph that made me want to scream. He had won not with facts, but with confidence. He had won because he looked like the future, and I looked like the past. The meeting ended abruptly at 11:45. I gathered my ignored papers, feeling the weight of their dismissal physically pressing on my shoulders. I walked back to my glass box by the server room. the noise of the trading floor sounding more like a warning siren than industry. I sat at my desk, staring at the screensaver. I wondered why I stayed. I wondered why I spent 10 years saving them from themselves, only to be treated like a malfunctioning appliance. Then, a notification pinged on my screen. It was an email from the Human Resources Director. Subject: meeting with Mr. Pike Alice. Please come to the executive conference room, the private one attached to Lawson's office, at 4 this afternoon. Mr. Pike wants to discuss your role and the future structure of the strategy team. My heart skipped a beat. A private meeting? With Lawson? Hope is a dangerous thing. It is the most treacherous variable in any risk model because it is not based on data. Despite the humiliation of the morning, despite the years of being ignored, a small, foolish part of me ignited. VP of Strategy. The position had been open for 3 months. I had been doing the work of that role for 5 years without the title or the pay. I had written the white papers. I had designed the hedging protocols that saved the firm during the flash crash 2 years ago. Maybe Lawson had been performing in the boardroom. Maybe he had to side with Tyler publicly to keep the morale up, but privately, he knew who actually understood the numbers. He was going to promote me. He was going to finally give me the seat at the table I had earned. I smoothed my skirt. I took a deep breath. For the first time that day, the hum of the servers sounded less like a machine and more like a chorus. I spent the next 4 hours preparing. I did not run numbers. I rehearsed my acceptance. I thought about how I would graciously accept the title, how I would fix the mess Tyler was creating from a position of authority. I was so naive. At 3:55, I walked toward Lawson's office. I walked past the assistants who ignored me, past the framed magazine covers of Lawson smiling his shark smile. I thought I was walking toward my future. I did not know I was walking into an execution. The private conference room attached to Lawson's office was a masterpiece of intimidation, designed by a minimalist architect who hated privacy. It was a cube of floor-to-ceiling glass, suspended like a transparent cage over the trading floor. From the inside, you could see the tops of heads, the flickering monitors, and the frantic hand gestures of the traders below. It was soundproof, yet it felt exposed. Everywhere I looked, I saw reflections of myself overlaid on the city skyline. I saw a woman in a navy cardigan, posture rigid, holding a leather folio like a shield. I sat down at the circular glass table. In the center, a projector hummed, displaying a single slide titled Summit Bridge Vision 2030 in a bold, sans serif typeface. My heart hammered against my ribs. 2030? This was long-term strategy. This was high-level planning. This was the conversation I had been rehearsing in my shower for 3 years. I placed my hands on the table to stop them from trembling. The cool glass felt slick under my palms. I told myself that the morning meeting had been a test. Lawson had needed to see if I could hold my ground against Tyler's reckless aggression. I had held it. I had brought the data. Now, away from the theater of the trading floor, Lawson was going to acknowledge that the foundation of this company required an adult in the room. Lawson walked in first. He did not look at me. He was looking at his reflection in the window, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. He looked like a man preparing for a photo shoot, not a strategy session. Behind him came the Director of Human Resources, a woman named Karen who always smiled with her mouth but never with her eyes. And then, strolling in with his hands in his pockets, came Tyler. Tyler winked at me. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. Lawson finally turned around. He sat down opposite me, leaving 2 empty chairs between us. It was a power move, a physical manifestation of the distance he wanted to keep. Alice, Lawson began, clasping his hands on the table. We have been reviewing the direction of the firm. The market is evolving. The old metrics simply do not capture the velocity of modern capital. We need to be faster. We need to be louder. I nodded slowly, waiting for the pivot where he would ask me to design the safety rails for this new speed. That is why, Lawson continued, his voice smooth as polished stone. We have decided to appoint Tyler as the new Vice President of Strategy, effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not a ringing in my ears. It was a sudden vacuum where sound used to be. I looked at Lawson, waiting for the punchline. I looked at Karen, who was studying her manicure. I looked at Tyler, who was grinning like a cat that had just been gifted a canary. Tyler represents the future, Lawson said, gesturing vaguely at the golden boy. He brings a new energy, a fresh perspective. He speaks the language of the next generation of investors. I found my voice. It sounded distant, like it was coming from the other side of the glass. Lawson, I said, I have built the risk architecture of this firm for 10 years. The models Tyler is using, the models he wants to leverage, are mine. I wrote the code. I designed the hedging protocols. Lawson waved his hand dismissively. And we value that. Alice, we truly do. You are an incredible technician. You are a workhorse, not a strategist, not a leader, a beast of burden to be driven until it collapses. We want you to stay exactly where you are, Lawson said, offering me a smile that looked like a baring of teeth. We need you to support Tyler. Be his bedrock. He is going to be the face, the vision. You will be the engine room. It is a perfect partnership. I looked at Tyler. He was leaning back in his chair, spinning a pen between his fingers. We are going to do great things. Alice, Tyler said. His voice was patronizing, dripping with unearned authority. Actually, I am going to need you to package up all your current models. Send me the raw data files, the passwords to the back end, everything. He paused, tilting his head as if studying a specimen. And Alice, can we change the formatting? Your spreadsheets are so academic. I need to change the fonts and the tone. We need something modern, something that pops on an iPad screen for the investors. The words hit me like a physical slap. He did not want my logic. He did not want my analysis of the liquidity crisis looming on the horizon. He wanted my life's work, my complex, elegant mathematical warnings, to be reformatted to look pretty. He wanted to take the engine out of the car, paint it gold, and drive it off a cliff because it looked better that way. I looked at the glass wall. My reflection looked back. I saw a woman who had spent a decade believing that competence was its own currency. I saw a fool. There were two paths diverging in that cold, bright room. Path one was to scream, to throw my folio at Lawson's tanned face, to list every disaster I had averted, every dollar I had saved them, every time I had stayed until 2 a.m. while they were out buying bottle service. If I did that, they would call security. They would label me hysterical. I would be the crazy spinster who could not handle the success of a younger man. Path 2 was silence. It was the path of the ghost. I did not cry. My tear ducts felt arid, dried up by the sheer heat of the rage ignited in my chest. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I picked up my folio. Understood, I said. My voice was level, devoid of any inflection. I will prepare the files for transfer. Lawson looked relieved. He had expected a scene. He hated scenes that he did not script. Good, he said, standing up and checking his watch. Teamwork. Alice, that is what makes Summit Bridge special. I turned and walked out. I did not slam the door. I closed it softly, with the precision of a vault locking shut. I walked a few paces down the hallway and stopped behind a structural pillar, just out of sight of the glass cube. I knew the acoustics of that corridor. I knew that there was a gap between the glass panel and the drywall where sound leaked out if you stood at the right angle. I stood there, pressing my back against the cold metal of the pillar. She took that better than I expected. I heard Karen say, I was worried we would have to offer a severance package. Lawson laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. Alice, she is not going anywhere. She is safe. She is furniture. Karen, you do not pay severance to a desk lamp. She is useful in the back end. Tyler chimed in. But honestly, can you imagine putting her in front of the pension fund guys? With that hair and those clothes? She depresses the room just by walking into it. She does not fit the Summit Bridge image. As long as she keeps the servers running and the compliance reports filed, I do not care what she wears. Lawson said, just keep her in her box. We do not need the ghost haunting the boardroom. I walked away. My heels clicked rhythmically on the polished concrete floor. Safe, furniture, back end, box. I returned to my desk next to the server room. The hum of the cooling fans, usually a comfort, now sounded like a mockery. I sat there for 3 hours, staring at a blank email draft. At 4:45 in the afternoon, a notification popped up on every screen in the office. It was a company-wide email from Lawson Pike. Subject: a new era for Summit Bridge team. I am thrilled to announce the promotion of Tyler Crane to Vice President of Strategy. Tyler's vision and energy are exactly what we need to lead Summit Bridge into the next decade. Please join me in congratulating him on this well-deserved achievement. I scrolled down. At the very bottom, in a font size 2 points smaller than the rest of the text, was a single line. We also want to thank Alice Hughes for her continued contributions behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, not even a title, just a prepositional phrase indicating invisibility. The office Slack channel exploded. Emojis of rockets, fireworks, and champagne bottles flooded the general chat. Congrats, Tyler. Well deserved. Man to the moon. My name was not mentioned once. I sat in the blue light of my monitors, watching the digital party unfold for the man who had just insulted my life's work. They were celebrating the captain who was steering them toward an iceberg, and ignoring the engineer who was pointing at the radar. At 5:30, an automated system message appeared on my primary monitor. Access revoked. I frowned and tried to open the main strategy folder, the one containing the live risk models and the source code for the trading algorithms. Permission denied. Contact administrator. My phone rang. It was an IT technician named Gary, a 20-year-old kid I had taught how to configure the firewall. Hey, Alice, Gary said, sounding embarrassed. Look, I am sorry. I just got a ticket from Lawson marked urgent. I have to migrate all the strategy permissions to Tyler's user group. He wants full admin rights. You have been toggled down to read-only access for the archive data. I gripped the phone receiver. Read-only. I was a spectator in my own creation. And Alice Gary hesitated. They also asked me to update the digital floor plan, your office. They asked me to rename it. Rename it to what? Gary. I asked. Data Warehouse 3. He whispered. I hung up the phone. I looked at the door of my office. There was a small plastic holder where my nameplate used to be. It was empty. I had not even seen them remove it. I was no longer Alice Hughes, Senior Risk Strategist. I was a component of Data Warehouse 3. I was a ghost in the machine. But as I sat there, the humiliation began to harden into something else. It cooled and crystallized into a sharp, jagged resolve. They thought I was safe. They thought I was furniture. They thought that by taking away my right access to the server, they had disarmed me. They forgot one thing. I was the one who built the system. I knew where the backups were. I knew where the mirrors were hidden. And I knew that while they were busy changing the fonts to look modern, they had not changed the legacy passwords on the deep storage drives. I was not going to cry. I was not going to quit. If they wanted me to be a ghost, I would be a ghost. And ghosts are terrifying for a reason. They are the things you thought you buried, coming back to settle the score. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. I picked up a pen. I wrote down the date. Then, I wrote down 3 names: Lawson Pike, Tyler Crane, Summit Bridge Equity. I drew a line through each of them. It was not a to-do list. It was a menu. The invitation to the Summit Bridge annual gala arrived with a red stamp that read, Senior Staff Attendance Mandatory. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. The theme for the evening was The New Gilded Era, a choice so lacking in self-awareness that it felt almost satirical. Lawson Pike and his wife, Bianca, wanted to celebrate wealth in a room full of people who were terrified of the next quarter's earnings report. I did not want to go. The wound from the boardroom betrayal was still fresh, pulsing with a dull, throbbing heat every time I saw Tyler Crane's name in an email. But I had to go. To stay home would be an admission of defeat. It would prove that I was hiding in my data warehouse, licking my wounds. So I decided to dress like armor. I chose a high-necked black dress made of heavy silk. It was severe, elegant, and completely unbranded. There was no logo on the chest, no monogram on the hem. It was cut by a tailor who understood that fabric should whisper, not scream. Then, I reached for the bag. It was a top-handle bag made of cognac-colored leather, crafted in Italy in the 1960s by a man whose name was never stamped in gold foil. It had belonged to my mother. She was a high school history teacher who saved for 2 years to buy it during her only trip to Europe. The leather was rich and deep, carrying the patina of decades of care. It smelled of cedar and old paper. When I held the handle, I did not just feel leather. I felt the calluses of my mother's hands correcting papers late at night. I felt her dignity. It was the only thing of hers I had left. I took a cab to the Aurora Crown Hotel. The venue was a monstrosity of marble and velvet, designed to make you feel small and expensive all at once. The air inside the ballroom smelled of lilies and desperation. Waiters in white gloves moved like ghosts through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than the hourly wage of the men serving it. I tried to stick to the shadows. My plan was simple. I would find the check-in desk, ensure my name was marked on the list, survive 1 hour of polite nodding, and then vanish out the side door. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and aggressively bright gowns. The noise was overwhelming, a roar of laughter and clinking glass. In the center of it all, standing under a crystal chandelier that looked like an explosion of diamonds, was Lawson Pike. He was holding a Scotch glass, his face flushed with the intoxication of attention. Next to him was Bianca. Bianca Pike was wearing a dress made entirely of gold sequins. It caught every photon of light in the room and reflected it back with violent intensity. She looked like a trophy that had learned to walk. Surrounding her was her court, a circle of board members' wives who laughed in unison whenever she tilted her head. I steered myself toward the periphery, navigating around a sculpture made of ice. I was almost safe. I was almost invisible. Then, a young receptionist with a headset and a clipboard stepped into my path. "Ms. Hughes," she chirped, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a whistle. "So glad you made it. We have you seated at table 19. The volume of her voice was unfortunate. The silence that followed was catastrophic. Heads turned. The circle under the chandelier broke. Bianca Pike's eyes, heavily lined with kohl, scanned the room and locked onto me. She smiled, but it was not a greeting. It was the look a predator gives a wounded animal that has stumbled into its clearing. "Alice," Bianca called out. Her voice was melodic, loud enough to carry across the polished floor. "Do come over. Lawson was just saying we have not seen you since the reorganization." There was no escape. To run would be cowardice. I tightened my grip on the cognac leather handle of my bag and walked toward the light. Every step felt heavy. I could feel eyes on me, assessing, judging, pricing. I stopped at the edge of their circle. Lawson nodded at me, a quick dismissive gesture before returning his gaze to his drink. Tyler was there, too, wearing a tuxedo with a velvet lapel that was too wide. He was swirling a martini and looking at me with amusement. "Good evening, Bianca," I said. My voice was steady. Bianca did not look at my face. She looked at my dress, her eyes raking down the black silk with boredom. Then, her gaze stopped at my hand. It stopped at the bag. She blinked. Then she let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh my God," Bianca said, placing a hand on her chest. "Alice, what on earth is that?" The conversation in the immediate vicinity died. Everyone loves a spectacle, especially when it involves someone else's humiliation. I lifted the bag slightly. "It is a handbag." "Bianca?" Bianca smirked, looking around at her friends to ensure they were all watching. "I can see that. But honey, this is the Summit Bridge Gala. The theme is the Gilded Era, not the Great Depression. That thing looks like something my grandmother would have donated to the Salvation Army." A ripple of titters went through the group of wives. One of them whispered something behind her hand. "It is vintage," I said, keeping my tone cool. "It is Italian. Vintage usually implies it was a designer piece to begin with," Bianca countered, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "That just looks tired. It is scratched. The color is muddy. Did you find it at a thrift shop on your way here? We have a dress code. Alice, we try to maintain a certain standard for the investors. My knuckles were white against the leather. This bag had held my mother's lesson plans. It had held the tissues she cried into when my father left. It held the checkbook she used to pay for my college tuition. Dollar by painful dollar. It belonged to my mother. I said, "She passed away 3 years ago. It is the only thing of hers I carry." I thought that would stop her. I thought the mention of death in a mother would trigger some basic human decency, even in a woman like Bianca Pike. I was wrong. Bianca tilted her head, her gold earrings swinging. "Oh, that is tragic, truly. But you know, Alice, maybe it is a kindness that she is not here. I am sure she would be mortified to see her daughter rise to this level in corporate America, and still walk around carrying accessories that look like props from a black and white movie. You are representing Lawson now. You represent the firm. You cannot look like the help." The cruelty was so precise, so casual, that it took my breath away. She had not just insulted the leather, she had insulted the woman who carried it. She had reduced my mother's life to a fashion faux pas. Tyler stepped forward then, smelling of gin and expensive cologne. He put a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and condescending. "Hey, do not take it so hard." "Alice," Tyler said, grinning at the group. "Look, if money is tight, just let me know. We can authorize a salary advance. Get you a nice Chanel or something. Upgrade your look. Honestly, standing there with that thing, I almost asked you to take my empty glass. You look like the staff." The group exploded into laughter. It was a jagged, ugly sound. Lawson even chuckled into his scotch, shaking his head as if Tyler were just a mischievous child. I stood there, frozen. I looked at Bianca, gleaming in her gold sequins. I looked at Tyler, preening in his velvet. I looked at Lawson, the man I had made rich, laughing at the suggestion that I was a servant. I did not cry. I did not throw my champagne in their faces. I did not scream that the bag in my hand was worth more in craftsmanship and soul than everything they were wearing combined. I simply tightened my fingers around the handle. The leather felt warm and solid, a grounding wire to the earth. I removed Tyler's hand from my shoulder. I brushed the spot where he had touched me, as if brushing off dust. "Enjoy your evening," I said. I turned my back on them. As I walked away, I heard Bianca's voice floating over the laughter. "Seriously, someone needs to tell her that ancient history belongs in a museum, not a ballroom. Ancient, obsolete." I walked past the ice sculpture. I walked past the check-in desk. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and out into the cold Chicago night. The wind hit my face, drying the sweat that had broken out on my hairline. I looked down at the bag. In the harsh streetlights, the cognac leather glowed with a deep, rich amber hue. It was not tired. It was enduring. It had survived decades. It had survived my mother's struggles. It had survived this night. They called it ancient because they did not understand the difference between price and value. They thought value was something you bought in a store with a logo stamped on it. They thought value was gold sequins and velvet lapels. I stood on the curb, waiting for my car. A strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a strategist who has finally seen the opponent's entire hand. They were not just greedy, they were hollow, they were fragile. They built their entire sense of self on the reflection in a mirror and the approval of strangers. I looked back at the hotel. The lights of the ballroom blazed from the second floor. Let them laugh, let them call me ancient. History teaches us one thing about empires built on arrogance and gold paint. They always fall, and usually, they are brought down not by an army, but by the people they thought were too small to matter. I stroked the leather of my mother's bag. "You are not a prop." I whispered to the silence. "You are the war chest." I got into the car. I did not go home to sleep. I went home to work. The gala was over. The war had just begun. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was sharp enough to cut glass. I sat on a concrete bench facing the flow of traffic on Michigan Avenue, watching the red taillights bleed into the darkness like a slow-moving river of lava. It was midnight. The gala was still raging a few blocks away, a bubble of warm, golden light, where people like Tyler Crane were drinking gin and toasting to a future they did not understand. I was cold, but I did not feel it. The adrenaline in my system was burning too hot. I placed the cognac leather bag on my lap. In the harsh street lamp light, the scratches looked like scars. I unclasped the brass latch. It clicked with a satisfying, mechanical weight. I reached past my phone, past my wallet, and slipped my fingers into the zippered interior pocket. The lining was silk, worn thin by time. I pulled out a small, yellowed envelope. It was the letter my mother had written to me the day I graduated from college. She had been sick then, the cancer already eating away at the margins of her life, but her handwriting had been firm. I did not need to open it. I knew the words by heart. Alice, the world will try to put a price tag on you. Do not let them decide your value. You are the one who keeps the score. I traced the curve of her signature with my thumb. Bianca Pike thought this bag was a symbol of poverty. She thought it was debris from a life that did not matter. She was wrong. This bag was not a relic. It was a vault. And tonight, I was opening it. I put the letter back, snapped the bag shut, and stood up. I hailed a cab, not to retreat, but to regroup. My apartment was in Lincoln Park, a small, one-bedroom unit on the third floor of a walk-up. It was sparse. There was no art on the walls, no decorative plants, no clutter. Lawson Pike had visited once, years ago, to drop off a file. He had looked around with a sneer of pity, assuming I lived this way because I had to. He saw a woman who could not afford luxury. He did not understand that I lived this way because I preferred liquidity to furniture. I walked in, kicked off my heels, and locked the door. I did not turn on the overhead lights. Instead, I switched on the single brass lamp on my dining table. I went to the kitchen and brewed a pot of black coffee. The smell filled the small space, bitter and sharp. I poured a mug, the steam rising in the yellow light, and carried it to the table. I swept aside the placemats. I opened my personal laptop, a custom-built machine with encryption protocols that would give the NSA a headache. Then I pulled a stack of physical files from my bookshelf and spread them out. This was no longer a dining table. It was a war room. It was time to look at the real numbers. Not the numbers Lawson saw the salary he paid me, the bonus he withheld, but the numbers that defined my actual leverage. For 17 years, I had been the invisible woman, while my colleagues leased BMWs and bought lofts in the West Loop to impress women they met at bars. I had lived on 35% of my income. I invested the rest. I was a disciple of compound interest. I opened my brokerage account. The login screen blinked. I typed in the password. The balance loaded. It was a number with 2 commas. I had shorted the housing market in 2008, a trade I executed quietly while the rest of the firm was panic selling. I had bought Amazon and Google when they were still finding their footing. But my biggest asset, the heavy artillery I had been hoarding, was right there at the bottom of the portfolio. Summit Bridge equity, employee stock options, for a decade. Every time the firm wanted to save cash on bonuses, they paid me in options. Lawson thought he was giving me paper confetti. He thought the strike price was so far out of the money that they would never vest. But I knew the cycles. I had exercised every single option when the price dipped, accumulating a silent, dormant stake in the company I worked for. I was not just an employee, I was a sleeping giant. Lawson thought I needed his paycheck to pay my rent. He had no idea that I could buy his building if I liquidated my positions, but I did not want the building. I wanted his throat. I took a sip of coffee. The caffeine hit my bloodstream like a starter pistol. I had capital, but capital alone was not enough to take down a firm like Summit Bridge. I needed tactical violence. I needed someone who knew how to bleed a company in public. I opened a secure messaging app on my laptop. It routed through 3 different servers in Europe before connecting. I scrolled down to a contact I had not spoken to in 4 years. Damien Cole. Damien was a corporate raider. In the polite society of Chicago finance, he was the boogeyman. He bought distressed companies, gutted the management, sold the assets, and walked away with millions while the board of directors was still reading the bylaws. 4 years ago, Damien had been the target of a hostile audit that was rigged to destroy him. I had been on the opposing team. I saw the setup. It was bad math. A lazy frame job by a rival firm. Instead of burying him, I had sent him a single anonymous email pointing out the error in the auditor's logic. He had walked away clean. He knew it was me. He had sent a message the next day, "I owe you a body. Name the time." I typed into the chat window, 700 hours tomorrow. I need a war room. Target Summit Bridge. I watched the cursor blink. The timestamp showed it was 1 in the morning. Damien was an insomniac. I knew he would be awake. 10 seconds later, the reply appeared. "I always wondered when you would get tired of saving them." "Is the day finally here?" I typed back. "It is not just the day, it is the end of the era." "Done," Damien replied. "Cole's strategic offices. The coffee is better than yours. Bring the files." I closed the chat. A cold smile touched my lips. I turned back to the papers spread out on my table. I pulled the Summit Bridge capitalization table, the list of who owned what percentage of the company. It was a complex web of voting rights, preferred shares, and common stock. Lawson held 12%. The board held another 15%. The rest was scattered among institutional investors, pension funds, and a few silent partners from the early days. My eyes scanned the list of the forgotten. There was Arthur Holloway. The co-founder Lawson had forced out in a boardroom coup 5 years ago. He still held Class B preferred shares. There was Monica Reyes, the former compliance officer who was fired for asking too many questions about Lawson's expense account. She held a block of vested stock she had refused to sell out of spite. There were half a dozen others, people Lawson had used, discarded, and forgotten. He thought they were history. I saw them as ammunition. I picked up a red marker. I did not circle the dollar amounts. I circled the column labeled voting rights. Most people think a hostile takeover is about buying all the shares. It is not. It is about buying the anger. It is about aggregating the resentment of everyone who has ever been burned and focusing it into a single laser beam of destruction. I looked at the total. If I combined my options with Damien's capital and the voting proxies of the exiles, we would not just have a seat at the table. We would own the table. I poured another cup of coffee. The night was young. I had emails to draft, files to decrypt, and a strategy to map out. Bianca Pike had laughed at my bag. She had called it ancient. She did not realize that she had just handed me the weapon. I picked up the red marker again and wrote a single number on the top of the legal pad. 51%. It was not about the money anymore. It was about the checkmate. The offices of Cole Strategic were located in a converted industrial warehouse in the West Loop, a stark contrast to the glass tower of Summit Bridge. There was no polished marble here, only exposed brick, steel beams, and the hum of high-frequency trading servers. It was 5 in the morning. The city outside was still gray and dormant, but inside Damien Cole's private war room, the lights were blazing white. Damien stood by a massive drafting table, spreading out a physical document that smelled of archival dust. It was the original shareholder registry of Summit Bridge, dating back to before the initial public offering. He looked exactly as I remembered. Sharp features, eyes that missed nothing, and an energy that vibrated at a higher frequency than normal people. He placed a heavy paperweight on the corner of the scroll. "This is a museum piece." "Alice," Damien said, tapping a section of the list with a pen. "Class B preferred shares, 10-to-1 voting rights. Lawson told everyone these were liquidated during the restructuring in 2015. He lied," I said, pouring 2 cups of black coffee from the carafe on the sidebar. Lawson never throws away anything that might give him power, but he is too arrogant to think anyone else would look for them. He convinced these holders that the shares were non-transferable and effectively worthless, so they would not try to sell them. He put them to sleep. I walked over to the table and looked at the names. It was a graveyard of Lawson Pike's betrayals. Every name represented a handshake he had broken or a back he had stabbed. "Let us wake them up," Damien said. I picked up the secure phone Damien had set up. The first name on the list was Arthur Holloway. Arthur was 72 years old. He was the brilliant mathematical mind who had co-founded the firm with Lawson 20 years ago. When the company went public, Lawson had maneuvered Arthur out, painting him as senile and out of touch to the board. Arthur had retreated to a small coastal town in Florida, taking his bitterness and his diluted shares with him. I dialed the number. It rang 4 times. "Hello?" a voice rasped, thick with sleep and irritation. "Who is calling me at this hour, Mr. Holloway? This is Alice Hughes." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear the static and the faint sound of a television in the background. Alice. The voice sharpened. Lawson's little calculator mouse. The one who lives in the server room. I did not flinch at the description. "I am the one who sent the white lilies when your wife passed away." Arthur. Because Lawson was too busy looking at his stock price to sign the card. The silence on the other end softened. "Just a fraction. I remember. You were the only one from that godforsaken place who remembered her name. What do you want?" "Alice. If Lawson sent you to beg for my endorsement on some new fund, tell him to go to hell. Lawson does not know I am calling." I said, my voice low and precise, "and I am not here to beg. I am here to buy." Arthur laughed, a dry coughing sound. "Buy what my Class B shares." Lawson told me years ago those papers were only good for framing on the wall. He said they had no liquidity value. I leaned in closer to the microphone. "Arthur, if Lawson Pike tells you something is worthless, it is because he is terrified you will realize you are sitting on a gold mine. Those shares carry super voting rights, and right now, I am willing to pay you 3 times their face value in cash." Today, I heard the rustle of sheets. The tone of the conversation shifted instantly from annoyance to business. Arthur Holloway had not lost his instincts. He had just lost his motivation. 3 times Arthur asked, "That is a lot of money for a souvenir." "Why?" "Because I am going to do the one thing you always wanted to do." "Arthur," I said, "I am going to walk into that boardroom and pull the chair out from under him." The line went quiet for 10 seconds. Then, Arthur let out a long, satisfied sigh. "You are going to kill the king. I am going to checkmate him." I corrected, "Send the contract." Arthur said, "I do not even need the money. I would pay you to see the look on his face. But take the shares. Burn him down." "Alice." I hung up. I looked at Damien. He was already typing, drafting the electronic transfer agreement. 1 down. Damien said, "Who is next?" I ran my finger down the list. Monica Reyes. Monica had been the vice president of compliance 3 years ago. She was a single mother who took her job seriously. When she flagged a suspicious transaction involving Lawson's personal shell companies, she was fired for gross incompetence the next day. Lawson had blackballed her from every major firm in Chicago. She was working as a consultant for a mid-sized insurance firm now, barely making half her old salary. I dialed. She answered on the second ring. Already awake. Likely getting kids ready for school. "Alice," she asked. Her voice guarded. "Is everything okay?" "You never call. I need your help." "Monica. And I need your proxy." I explained the plan. I did not sugarcoat it. I told her about the leverage, the risk models, and the liquidity crisis Lawson was hiding. When I mentioned the offshore accounts in the Caribbean, I could hear her breathing change. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew he was moving money. We can prove it." I said, "But I need the voting block he left you with. I know he promised to buy it back and never did." "He told me it was part of my severance package," Monica said, bitterness coating her words. "Then he ghosted me. He thought I was too broke to sue him. Sell it to me." I said, "I will give you the fair market rate plus a premium. And Monica, when we win, I will clear your record. The gross incompetence mark goes away. You get your reputation back." There was a muffled sob on the other end, quickly stifled. "Do it," she said. "Get him. Alice. For all of us." The morning blurred into a fever dream of negotiation. I was not a risk strategist anymore. I was a collector of ghosts. I called a small family fund in Ohio that Lawson had courted with promises of a board seat, only to shut the door in their faces once their check cleared. I called the widow of a former partner who had been manipulated into signing away her husband's pension rights. Each call followed the same pattern: surprise, anger, then a grim, vindictive satisfaction. These people did not care about the premium I was offering, although they took it. They cared about the opportunity to strike back at the man who had treated them like stepping stones. By 6:30 in the morning, the sun was rising over the Chicago skyline, turning the gray clouds into bruised purple. Damien walked over to the desk with a final tally. He looked tired, but wired. "Okay, let us look at the board," he said. We had secured the transfer agreements or ironclad proxy votes for 12.4% of the total voting rights. I did the mental math instantly. I added my own accumulated stock options, which I had quietly exercised electronically while speaking to Arthur. We are at roughly 14%, maybe 15% if the option execution clears immediately. I said. Damien leaned back against the brick wall, crossing his arms. "It is a strong start, Alice, but 14% is not 51%. It is enough to make noise. It is enough to get a meeting. But it is not a takeover." He pointed to the red section of the chart. "The rest of the equity is held by the giants: Granite Harbor, North Axis, Red Ridge. These are institutional heavyweights. They do not care about your revenge story. They do not care about Lawson's personality. They care about stability. They hate drama." Damien warned, "If you go in there and start a war, they might side with Lawson just to keep the boat steady. They fear uncertainty more than they fear corruption." I stood up and closed the laptop. I packed the signed transfer agreements into my mother's cognac bag. "You are right, Damien," I said, fastening the brass clasp. "They hate drama. But there is one thing they hate more than drama." "What is that, losing money?" I said cold. "They are sticking with Lawson because they think he is the safe bet. They think the ship is steady." I picked up the bag and slung it over my shoulder. "I am not going to convince them to like me, Damien. I am going to show them that the ship is already sinking. Once they realize their money is burning, they will not care about stability. They will run for the exit, and I will be the only one holding the door open." Damien smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Go to work, Alice." I left the warehouse and hailed a cab back to the Loop. The city was fully awake now. Commuters were rushing to their offices, clutching coffees, eyes glued to their phones. I walked into the lobby of the Summit Bridge building at 7:45. I swiped my ID badge. For a second, I thought it might not work, that they might have locked me out completely. But the light turned green. I was still an employee. I was still furniture. I rode the elevator up to the 40th floor. The doors opened onto the trading floor, the noise already swelling to its daily roar. Tyler Crane was standing near the center of the room, laughing loudly with a group of junior analysts, holding a tablet like a scepter. I walked past them. "Did you enjoy the gala?" Alice Tyler called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We missed you at the after-party." I did not stop. I did not look at him. I kept walking toward the back corridor, toward the cold, humming wall of the server room. It was fine. "Tyler," I said over my shoulder, "I just had some house cleaning to do." He laughed. No one paid attention to the woman in the navy cardigan walking to her cubicle. They saw a beaten dog returning to its cage. They did not see the predator walking among them. I sat down at my desk in the newly christened Data Warehouse 3. I placed my bag on the desk. Inside that ancient scratched leather sat the signed vengeance of Arthur Holloway, Monica Reyes, and half a dozen others. I was 14% of the way to their destruction. Now, it was time to burn the other 37%. I sat at my desk in the newly renamed Data Warehouse 3, surrounded by the deafening hum of the server racks. My official access to the main financial ledger was gone. When I tried to query the live cash flow database, a bright red window popped up telling me I did not have the required clearance level. Tyler had made a big show of migrating everything to a new cloud-based system managed by a friend of his from business school, claiming it was more agile. He did not know that agility is useless if you do not understand the architecture. Years ago, I had built a sandbox mirror, a duplicate version of our internal system designed to test risky algorithms before deploying them. It was a safety feature, because it needed to test real-world scenarios. I had hardwired it to receive a passive feed of every single transaction that moved through the company's pipes. It was read-only, invisible to the main admin console, and Tyler had no idea it existed. I logged into the mirror, the screen filled with cascading lines of code. I filtered for outgoing wire transfers scheduled for the next 72 hours. My stomach turned over. There were dozens of them, small amounts at first, then larger ones, $200,000, $500,000. All of them were labeled as consulting fees or strategic advisory retainers. All of them were destined for a cluster of entities registered in Caravel Cay. Caravel Cay was a tax haven in the Caribbean that made the Cayman Islands look like a paragon of transparency. I clicked on the recipient details. The companies had generic names like Apex Horizon and Blue Water Strategy. They were shell companies, empty vessels. Lawson and his inner circle were draining the company accounts. They knew the leverage bomb was ticking, and they were paying themselves first. They were stripping the copper wiring out of the walls before the building burned down. I sat back, my heart pounding against my ribs. If I waited to execute my takeover until I had 51%, I would be buying a corpse. Lawson would hollow out Summit Bridge, let the debt collapse the firm, and walk away with millions in his offshore accounts, while the employees and shareholders were left with the wreckage. I had to burn the house down to save it. I needed to trigger a panic that would freeze those transfers before the money left the building. I opened my encrypted chat with Damien. They are looting the vault. I typed, I see transfers scheduled to clear in 48 hours. We need to kill the liquidity. Now. Damien's reply came instantly. If you kill the liquidity, the stock crashes. Your options lose value. I do not care about the options. I replied, I care about the asset. If the cash leaves, there is nothing left to buy. Understood. Damien wrote, what is the play? We ask questions. I typed, we do not accuse, we just ask very loud, very specific questions. For the next 3 hours, I drafted a document. It was not a whistleblower complaint. It was written in the dry, academic tone of a forensic accountant. I titled it simply, An Analysis of Leverage Ratios and Cash Reserves at Summit Bridge Equity. I did not use inside information that could get me arrested. I used public data, footnotes from quarterly reports, and combined them with the theoretical risk of high-yield debt exposure. I pointed out the mathematical impossibility of their reported cash reserves versus their leverage. Then, I added a section on unusual administrative costs that mirrored the amounts being wired to Caravel Cay, asking if these were standard operating expenses. I did not say they were stealing. I simply asked why a firm with liquidity issues was spending millions on vague consulting fees in a known tax haven. I sent the file to Damien. He routed it through a series of anonymous servers and posted it to 3 high-traffic financial forums and a niche blog read by every short seller in New York. Then, I went home. The next morning, I called the HR line. I told them I had a migraine. It was the first sick day I had taken in 6 years. I went straight to Cole Strategic. The warehouse was buzzing with activity. Damien had 3 monitors set up on the main table. The market opened at 9:30 in the morning. Summit Bridge opened at $48.50 a share. At 9:35, a popular financial news aggregator picked up the blog post. The headline was less subtle than my report, Summit Bridge Equity New Gilded Era, or Liquidity Bubble. I watched the ticker, $48, $47.20. The volume started to spike. The algorithms that scanned news headlines for negative sentiment were reacting. By 10 o'clock, the stock was trading at $45. The whispers were starting. At 10:15, Lawson Pike appeared on a business news channel. He was in the studio, likely having been rushed there to do damage control. He looked polished, but I could see the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. The anchor asked him about the report. "It is absolute nonsense," Lawson said, forcing a laugh. "We have never been stronger. Our liquidity position is robust. These are just rumors spread by short sellers trying to make a quick buck. We are completely transparent. I picked up my phone. It is time to make the call. I said to Damien, I dialed a number I had saved years ago. It belonged to Daniel Ortiz. Daniel was a senior vice president at Harborline Bank, the institution that provided Summit Bridge with its revolving credit facility, the corporate credit card that kept the lights on and the trades flowing. Daniel was a nervous man. He liked clean spreadsheets and zero surprises. He answered on the first ring. Daniel Ortiz speaking. Hi. Daniel, it is Alice Hughes from Summit Bridge. Oh, Alice, Daniel said, sounding relieved to hear a familiar, boring voice. I am seeing some crazy headlines this morning. Lawson is on TV saying everything is fine. Please tell me everything is fine. I kept my voice low, hesitant. That is actually why I'm calling. Daniel, I am just doing a routine reconciliation of the sandbox data, and I saw some scheduled wires that looked odd. I wanted to make sure they were compliant with the covenants of our credit facility. There was a pause. What kind of wires? Daniel asked, his voice tightening. Well, I see a series of transfers initiated by the CEO's office to entities in Caravel K, I said, making sure to enunciate the location. They are marked as advisory fees, but they total almost $8 million over the next 2 days. I assumed you had signed off on a capital outflow that large, given the delicate nature of our current leverage. I could hear Daniel typing furiously in the background. Caravel K? Daniel asked. We did not authorize any transfers to Caravel K. The credit agreement specifically forbids transferring funds to non-compliant offshore jurisdictions without prior approval. Oh, I said, injecting a note of innocent panic into my voice. I must have misread the code. I am sure Lawson has a logical explanation, but if that money leaves, well, I just wanted to make sure the bank was protected. Alice, Daniel said, and I could hear the fear in his throat. Are those wires live? They are scheduled to clear starting at noon today. I said, I have to go. Daniel said. The line went dead. I looked at Damien. He was watching the terminal. Watch the ticker, I said. At 10:45, a breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the television screen. Harborline Bank suspends credit facility for Summit Bridge equity pending internal audit. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. In the financial world, a bank freezing your credit line is the equivalent of a doctor calling time of death. It tells the market that the people who see the real books are terrified. The stock price on the screen flickered. $41, $39, $37. It was a free fall. The high-frequency trading bots were dumping the stock. The institutional investors were waking up to the nightmare that their safe bet was toxic. My phone started buzzing with notifications from the office Slack. Panic, chaos, people asking if payroll would clear. I watched the number drop. $36.50. I was burning down the house I had helped build. I was destroying the value of the options I held, but I was also destroying Lawson's escape route. With the credit line frozen, the bank would lock down every account. Those transfers to Caravel K would be flagged and blocked. Lawson could not run with the money. He was trapped in the burning building with the rest of us. Damien looked at me. He was not smiling. He looked impressed and slightly frightened. You just wiped out $300 million of market cap in an hour, he said. I took a sip of cold coffee. I did not wipe it out. Damien, I said, I just corrected the price to reflect reality. Now, we wait for the fire sale. The stock hit $34. The phone in the war room rang. It was the broker for Granite Harbor, the large passive fund that held 8% of the company. They were calling Damien's offshore front company. They wanted to know if we were still interested in buying or if they should dump it on the open market. I looked at the receiver. Pick it up, I said. Tell them we are interested. But the price just went down. The ticker on Damien's main screen flashed red. It was a beautiful, violent color. The price of Summit Bridge stock had punched through the $40 support level like a stone through wet paper, and now it was free-falling. $38, $36, $32. The market smells fear better than any predator in the wild, and right now, the scent of Summit Bridge was rank with death. The Harborline Bank credit freeze had done exactly what I calculated it would do. It triggered the algorithms. "It is time to go shopping," Damien said, cracking his knuckles. He was staring at a secondary monitor that showed the real-time order book. "Look at Granite Harbor. They are trying to unload a block." Granite Harbor was a massive passive index fund. They held about 7.5% of Summit Bridge. Usually, they were the kind of investors who slept through board meetings, but today they were awake. I knew from my research that Granite was facing margin calls on a completely unrelated tech sector bet. They needed cash, and they needed it 10 minutes ago. They could not afford to ride Summit Bridge down to zero. "Call them," I said. "Offer them $34 a share. But the market is at 32. Damien argued. "Exactly." I said. "Give them a premium over the panic price, but a discount on yesterday. Give them a dignified exit. If they try to sell that much stock on the open market right now, they will crash the price to 20. Offering them 34 is a mercy killing." Damien picked up the phone. He used the voice of a bored institutional broker. "Granite Harbor Trading Desk. This is Cole Strategic. We see you have a liquidity problem. We are willing to take the entire Summit Bridge block off your hands. Dark pool transaction. Off the tape. Price is $34. I watched Damien's face. He listened, nodded, and then looked at his watch. "You have 3 minutes to decide." "Gentlemen," Damien said into the receiver, "the price is dropping as we speak. If you wait, the offer goes to 30. He held the phone away from his ear. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. He smiled. "Done." Damien said to me. He spoke back into the phone, confirming trade, block transfer initiated, pleasure doing business. He hung up. Just like that. We had absorbed nearly 8% of the company. I did the mental math instantly, between my options, the proxies from Arthur and the other exiles, and now the Granite Harbor block. We controlled roughly 23% of the voting rights. "We are heavy," I said, "but we are not the captain yet." "Who is next?" Damien pointed to a name on the list that made my skin crawl. North Axis Capital. North Axis was a hedge fund run by sharks in Connecticut. They held 10%. Unlike Granite, they were not passive. They were aggressive, greedy, and notoriously litigious. They would not sell just because the price was dropping. They would hold on out of spite, hoping to sue the board later. But North Axis had a weakness. They were currently raising capital for a new flagship fund. They could not afford a scandal. They could not afford to be seen holding the bag of a company that was being looted by its own CEO. I opened my laptop. I attached the raw log files I had pulled from the sandbox mirror, the ones showing the specific wire transfers to Caravel K, stamped with the digital fingerprints of Lawson's approval. I wrote a subject line, "Summit Bridge Liquidity, Your Reputation." I sent it to the personal email of the Chief Investment Officer at North Axis. 2 minutes later, I dialed his direct line. "Who is this?" he barked. He sounded like a man who was watching his bonus evaporate. "This is a concerned party," I said, keeping my voice digitally altered and low. "Check your email." There was silence on the line. I heard the click of a mouse, then a sharp intake of breath. "If that report regarding the Caravel K transfers becomes public while you are still a major shareholder," I continued, "the SEC will not just look at Lawson, they will look at you. They will ask why a sophisticated investor like North Axis did not do its due diligence. Your new fundraise will be dead in the water." "You are blackmailing me," he hissed. "I am offering you a life raft." I replied, "Sell your block. We will take it at $26. 26. That is robbery. The stock is trading at 30. The stock is trading on hope," I said, "in an hour. When the rumors about the looting hit the mainstream, it will be trading at 10. Do you want $26 in silence? Or do you want to explain to your investors why you held on to a criminal enterprise? You have 60 seconds. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the gears grinding in his head. He was weighing the loss of money against the loss of reputation. Reputation always wins. "Send the contract," he whispered. We closed the deal 3 minutes later. I sat back in my chair at the Summit Bridge office, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had just orchestrated the purchase of 18% of the company in under an hour. Our total control was now pushing past 30%. I was a ghost in the machine, eating the machine from the inside out. Around me, the office was dissolving into hysteria. Traders were shouting into phones, trying to offload positions. The screens were a sea of red. Lawson's office door was open. I could hear him screaming at the CFO. "Fix it!" I heard Lawson roar. "I do not care what the bank said. Get me another line of credit. Call the Cayman partners. Get the money moving." He was panic-inducing. He knew the walls were closing in. Then, my email pinged. I looked at the sender. Tyler Crane. I opened it. Subject urgent. Risk models. "Alice, I know things are crazy right now. Look, Lawson is breathing down my neck. We need to release a statement about the liquidity coverage ratio. The current numbers look bad. I need you to adjust the parameters on the stress test. Just widen the confidence interval so the reserves look adequate for a 90-day window. Just this once. Everyone does it. We can fix it next quarter. Please, I need this." I stared at the screen. The golden boy, the future of the company, the man who had mocked my bag and called me ancient. He was begging me to commit securities fraud to save his career. I hit reply. I typed 2 letters. No. I hit send. I watched him across the trading floor. He checked his phone. His face went pale. He looked over at the data warehouse, searching for me, but I had dimmed the lights in my glass box. To him, I was just a reflection. The day dragged on. The stock continued to bleed. By the time the closing bell rang at 4 in the afternoon, Summit Bridge closed at $21.80. It was a massacre. But we were not done. We were stuck at 33%. We needed 51 to kill the king. The remaining major block 17% was held by Redridge Partners. Redridge was a private equity firm run by Thomas Ridge. Thomas and Lawson were cut from the same cloth. They played golf at the same clubs. They shared summer homes in the Hamptons. Lawson believed, with every fiber of his arrogant being, that Redridge was his firewall. He believed Thomas would never sell. But Lawson did not read the industry newsletters. I did. I knew that Redridge had taken a massive hit on a commercial real estate deal in San Francisco 2 months ago. Their limited partners were furious. They were facing a liquidity crunch of their own. Friendship is a luxury. Solvency is a necessity. I packed up my bag, my mother's ancient, priceless bag, and walked out of the office. The silence on the trading floor was heavy, the kind of silence that follows a funeral. I went back to my apartment. I did not turn on the lights. I sat by the window, watching the city lights of Chicago, and waited. Damien had sent the offer to Redridge an hour ago. We offered $22 a share, a tiny premium over the close. It was an insult, really, but for a firm that needed cash to pay its own investors, it was a lifeline. If Thomas Ridge said no, Lawson might survive. He might find a white knight. He might be able to spin the story. If Thomas Ridge said yes, I would have 51%. The hours ticked by. 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11:30. I made a pot of tea. My hands were shaking. This was the longest night of my life. At 11:58, my personal cell phone rang. It was a local Chicago number. I did not recognize it. I picked it up. "Hello." There was a pause. The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and tired. It sounded like a man who had been drinking scotch for 3 hours. "Ms. Hughes," the voice said. "Who is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "This is Thomas Ridge," he said. My breath caught in my throat. "Mr. Ridge," I said, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Cut the crap." "Alice," Thomas said. He did not sound angry. He sounded resigned. "We received the offer from the shell company. We traced the funding structure. It took my analysts 3 hours, but they found the link to Cole Strategic, and everyone knows Damien Cole does not move a muscle unless you tell him to." He paused. "Lawson thinks I am his friend," Thomas continued. "He called me 5 times tonight. He was crying. Alice, he told me he is the victim of a conspiracy. He told me you are just a low-level analyst who does not understand the big picture. Lawson has a very active imagination, I said calmly. Thomas laughed softly. It was a dark sound. I have known Lawson for 20 years. He is a charming man, but he is a thief. I knew about Caravel K. I looked the other way because the stock was going up. But now he is toxic. So you are selling, I asked. Thomas sighed. The sound of ice clinking against glass came through the speaker. My investors want heads to roll. They want cash. I have a fiduciary duty to them, not to my golf partner. Yes, we signed the deal 10 minutes ago. The block is yours. I closed my eyes. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. 51%. Thank you. Thomas, I said, you made the rational choice. I have one question. Alice, Thomas said, his voice dropping an octave. You have the majority now. You own the place. We know it is you, and we want to know, what do you intend to do with Summit Bridge after you throw Lawson into the ocean? I looked at the reflection of my face in the darkened window. I did not look like a ghost anymore. I intend to clean it. Thomas, I said, and then I hung up. The game was over. The checkmate was on the board. All that was left now was to walk into the room and knock over the king. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the heavy breathing of Thomas Ridge on the other end of the line. The city lights of Chicago blurred in the distance, a sprawling grid of electric ambition, but my focus was entirely on the man who held the final piece of the puzzle. Thomas, I said, keeping my voice low and devoid of the tremors I felt in my hands. I am not a vandal. I am a strategist. I know the bones of Summit Bridge better than the architects who built the office. The firm has good bones. The algorithms are sound. The data infrastructure is solid. The problem is not the ship. The problem is the captain who is stripping the copper wire out of the hull to pay for his personal lifeboats. Thomas let out a dry, mirthless chuckle. You talk a good game, Alice. But Lawson and I go back 20 years. We have closed deals on the 18th hole at Augusta. We have shared holidays. You are asking me to put a knife in the back of a man whose children have played with my grandchildren. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the war room table. I am not asking you to stab him. Thomas, I am asking you to do your job. You have a fiduciary duty to your limited partners. If you protect a friend who is actively looting the company, that is not loyalty. That is complicit negligence. I paused to let the legal weight of those words sink in. I have the logs. Thomas, I have the sandbox records of the transfers to Caravel K. If I send those files to the Securities and Exchange Commission tomorrow morning, friendship will not keep you out of the deposition chair. Do you want to be the man who stopped the bleeding, or the man who held the bandage while the patient died? The silence on the line stretched out. It was the sound of a man calculating the cost of his conscience versus his capital. If I sell to you, Thomas said, his voice harder now, stripped of the sentimentality. If I give you the block, what is the price? $22.50 a share. I said instantly, it is 70 cents over the closing price. It is a premium for a stock that is currently radioactive. 23, Thomas countered instinctively. 22.50, I repeated, and a seat on the new board. When I restructure, I will need a voice of reason. I will need someone the street trusts. That can be you. Thomas, you can be the hero who helped clean up the mess, rather than the crony who watched it happen. There was a long exhale. I could practically hear him pouring another drink. You are a cold woman. Alice Hughes. I am a rational woman. Mr. Ridge. Fine, he said. 22.50, and the board seat. But there is a condition. Name it. We vote against Lawson at the next meeting. Thomas said, but I do not want to be the one to tell him. You do it. You look him in the eye. That was always the plan. I said. Thomas laughed again, but this time there was a note of genuine respect in it. You know, Alice, he said softly, Lawson always feared you. He used to joke about the quiet girl in the server room. He called you the actuary of doom. He said you looked at people like they were variables in an equation that did not balance. I guess he was right to be afraid. He was not afraid enough. I said. We hung up. I did not sleep that night. I spent the remaining hours staring at the ceiling. listening to the sirens wailing in the distance. I felt a strange, hollow calm. It was the feeling of a soldier cleaning their rifle before the final dawn. The next morning, I arrived at the Summit Bridge Tower at 8 o'clock. The lobby was quiet, but the air felt charged with static. The reception staff looked nervous, whispering behind their hands. They knew something was wrong, even if they did not understand the mechanics of it. I wore the same navy suit I always wore. I carried the same cognac leather bag. I did not look like a conqueror. I looked like an employee coming in to check her emails. I walked toward the elevator bank. The polished brass doors reflected a distorted version of the lobby. Just as I reached for the call button, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the security alcove. It was Bianca Pike. She looked nothing like the golden statue she had been at the gala. Her eyes were rimmed with red, swollen from crying or lack of sleep. Her expensive makeup was smeared at the corners. She was wearing a trench coat over what looked like pajamas, and her hair was pulled back in a messy, frantic knot. She stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the elevators. "You?" she hissed. Her voice was trembling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. "Good morning, Bianca," I said, clutching the handle of my bag. "You are happy, aren't you?" she spat, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You and your little internet friends, you are destroying him. Do you know he did not come home last night? He is sleeping in his office. He is falling apart." I looked at her. I felt no pity. I felt only the cold detachment of an observer. I am not doing anything to Lawson that he has not done to himself. "Bianca." She laughed, a high, hysterical sound that drew the attention of the security guard. "Oh, spare me the moral superiority. It is because of that stupid bag. Isn't it? Because I made a joke? You are petty. Alice, you are dragging down a billion-dollar company because your feelings were hurt. You and that trash bag are dragging the stock price into the gutter." I smiled. It was a genuine, soft smile. "I am not dragging anything down. Bianca, the market is just finally pricing the reality." I stepped closer to her, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You see, Bianca, that is the thing about value. You think value is the gold plating on the outside. You think it is the sequins and the noise, but the market eventually looks inside, just like my bag. You laughed at it because it was old. You did not understand that the leather was real. You did not understand that the stitching was done by hand, meant to last a lifetime." I gestured to the building around us. "Lawson built a company out of gold plating. It looks shiny, but it peels. I am just stripping the paint so we can see what is underneath." Bianca's face twisted. She looked desperate, searching for a weapon to hurt me with. "You do not know anything," she whispered furiously. "You think you are so smart. You think you have won. Lawson has a plan. He signed the contract last night." I paused. My internal radar pinged. "What contract?" "He sold the algorithmic trading unit," she blurted out, her eyes wide with malicious triumph. "He signed it over to the Zurich partners at 4 in the morning. The cash is coming in today. He is going to have enough liquidity to buy out your little rebellion and fire you before lunch. It is a core asset sale. He saved himself." My heart stopped for a fraction of a second, then started beating with a heavy, rhythmic thud. The algorithmic trading unit was the heart of the company. It was the engine. If Lawson had sold it without board approval, just to generate emergency cash to cover his own tracks, he had not just made a bad business decision, he had committed corporate suicide. Selling a core asset without a shareholder vote or board ratification was a violation of the corporate charter. It was illegal. It was the final nail in his coffin. Bianca, in her desire to hurt me, had just handed me the murder weapon. "Thank you, Bianca," I said softly, for what she snapped, confused by my reaction, for confirming that he is not just incompetent, but liable. I stepped around her. She tried to grab my arm, but the security guard, sensing the shift in dynamic, stepped forward. "Mrs. Pike, please," the guard said gently. I pressed the button. The elevator doors slid open with a smooth pneumatic hiss. I stepped inside the mirrored box. As the doors began to close, I saw Bianca standing in the lobby. looking small and defeated in her trench coat. She realized, too late, that she had said too much. I took out my phone. There was a new email notification. It was from the lawyer at Cole Strategic. Subject execution confirmation. I opened it. Redridge deal signed and executed. Proxy transfer complete effective 700 hours. Total aggregated voting rights, 51.2%. I looked at the number. 51.2%. It was a sterile mathematical figure, but to me, it looked like poetry. It meant that I was no longer an employee. I was no longer a ghost. I was the majority. The elevator climbed smoothly toward the 40th floor. My ears popped as the altitude changed. I looked at myself in the mirrored walls. I saw the navy suit. I saw the tired eyes. I saw the woman who had been ignored for 17 years. And then, I looked down at the bag. I smiled. A real smile. It was time to go to the meeting. The notification hit every executive inbox at 6:30 in the morning. It was marked with the highest urgency flag the internal system allowed. Subject emergency board meeting. 800 hours. Attendance mandatory. There was no agenda attached. There were no briefing documents, no slide decks, and no financial summaries. The message was stark. Stripped of the usual corporate fluff, it was the digital equivalent of a flare gun fired from a sinking life raft. The rumors swirling on the grapevine said that Lawson Pike intended to reassure the market and reaffirm the long-term vision of the company. It was a euphemism. You do not reaffirm a vision at 8 in the morning unless the reality is burning down around you. I arrived at the building at 7:45. I did not swipe my badge at the turnstiles that led to the trading floor. I did not walk the familiar path to the back corridor where the air conditioning hummed and the servers blinked in the dark. That path belonged to the ghost. That path belonged to the woman who wore cardigans and made herself small so others could feel big. Today, I took the express elevator reserved for client guests and board members. I caught my reflection in the polished steel of the elevator doors. The woman staring back at me was someone new. I had traded the shapeless navy knitwear for a black suit. It was tailored sharp enough to draw blood, with a structured blazer that emphasized the straight line of my shoulders. My hair, usually pulled back in a loose, forgettable bun, was smoothed back, severe and controlled. On my lips, I wore a shade of deep, crimson red. It was not a color for hiding. It was a color for war. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, the silence was heavy. It was different from the silence of the server room. This was the silence of a held breath. I could look down through the glass atrium to the trading floor below. It was chaos. Usually, at this hour, the traders would be shouting orders, laughing, and throwing stress balls. Today, they were huddled in tight, terrified clusters. The monitors were flashing red, reflecting the pre-market sell-off that was already hammering the stock price. I could see them checking their phones, reading the news about the credit freeze, whispering about layoffs, about bonus cuts, about the rumor that Lawson was selling off pieces of the company just to keep his own seat warm. I watched them for a moment. I saw a junior analyst, a kid no older than 22, putting his head in his hands. He was the collateral damage. He was the price Lawson was willing to pay to keep his country club membership. I turned away from the glass. I had work to do. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the main boardroom. The heels of my shoes sank into the plush wool, making my approach silent. I stopped just outside the heavy double doors made of mahogany. They looked like the gates to a fortress. I shifted the weight of my bag. The cognac leather felt warm under my fingers. I looked down at it. My mother's bag. The bag Bianca Pike had called ancient. The bag Tyler Crane had laughed at. They saw old leather. I saw a weapon case. I placed the bag on a side table and unclasped the brass lock. I needed to check the ammunition one last time. Inside, resting against the silk lining, was a blue folder. It was thick. It contained the executed transfer agreement from Redridge Partners. It contained the proxy forms signed by Arthur Holloway and Monica Reyes. It contained the confirmation of the block purchases from Granite Harbor and North Axis. It was 51.2% of the voting equity of Summit Bridge, bound in paper, but there was something else in there, too. I slid my hand behind the legal documents and pulled out a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. The ink was faded, turning sepia with age. It was a letter written to me 7 years ago by Elliot Grayson, the founder of this firm. He had died 2 months after writing it. Dear Alice, Lawson is a builder of facades, not foundations. I fear the day when the wind blows hard, if that day comes, and he forgets who actually laid the bricks of this house. I hope you will be there to remind him. You have the mind of a grandmaster. Do not let them treat you like a pawn. I read the words again. Elliot had seen the rot setting in even back then. He had left this note on my desk the day he retired, a warning from a ghost to a ghost. I folded the letter and placed it at the very front of the stack. This was not just a hostile takeover, this was an exorcism. I closed the bag. The clasp clicked shut, with a sound like a pistol hammer being cocked. I stepped closer to the boardroom doors. I could hear voices inside. They were muffled, but the desperation leaked through the wood. We have to find the leaker. Lawson's voice grated. It sounded raw, stripping the polish he usually applied. Someone inside this building gave those logs to the press. I want it to scour every email, every Slack message. I want heads on spikes. Tyler, I am trying. Lawson. Tyler's voice whined, higher pitched than usual, but everything was encrypted. Whoever did it used a routing system I have never seen, and the board is freaking out about the algo sale rumor. They are saying we bypassed the charter. Tell them it was an emergency liquidity measure, Lawson shouted. Tell them it was to save the firm. We control the narrative. We just need to survive the morning session. Once the Zurich money hits, we buy back the float and squeeze the shorts. They were delusional. They were rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while discussing how to blame the iceberg. They thought the threat was a leak. They had no idea the threat was standing 5 feet away, holding 51% of their existence in a vintage handbag. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A secure message from Damien. Registry updated. SEC filing sent. No way for Lawson to reverse without a public fight. When you walk in there, do not say too much. Let the numbers speak. I took a deep breath. My heart was beating slow and hard, a war drum in my chest. Excuse me, Ms. Hughes. I turned. Standing a few feet away was Earl, the head of building security. He was a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a uniform that was always impeccably pressed. He had seen me walk in every day for 10 years. He usually saw a tired woman in a cardigan rushing to hide in the back office. He was staring at me now, blinking. He looked at the suit. He looked at the hair. He looked at the way I was standing, not hunched over, but tall. Earl, I said, nodding. You look different today. Ms. Hughes, Earl said, searching for the right words. I almost did not recognize you. Is there a special occasion? I looked at the heavy doors behind me. Yes, Earl, I suppose there is. He shifted on his feet, looking at the closed boardroom doors. You know, Mr. Pike gave strict orders, no interruptions. He said only board members and the executive team. He seemed like he was in a mood. I smiled at Earl. It was gentle. I had always liked Earl. He was the only one who ever asked about my weekend. It is okay. Earl, I said softly, I have a pass. He looked at my empty hands, then at the bag. He seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in the physics of the building. All right then, Earl said, stepping back. Good luck, Ms. Hughes. Although, looking at you, I do not think you need it. You look like you are ready for something. I am not here to go to the server room today. Earl, I said. He nodded, turned, and walked back toward his station by the elevators. I was alone again. I turned back to the mahogany doors. This was the threshold. On one side was the past 17 years of being the safe, reliable, invisible Alice, the Alice who fixed the messes, the Alice who was furniture. On the other side was the future. I placed my hand on the brass handle. It was cold metal, heavy and solid. I closed my eyes for 1 second. I thought about the late nights. I thought about the moment Lawson told me I was safe. I thought about Tyler's laugh, I thought about Bianca's sneer at the gala. I waited for the anger to rise. I waited for the heat of humiliation to flood my veins. But it did not come. Instead, there was only ice. Clear, sharp, mathematical precision. Anger is messy. Anger makes mistakes. Strategy is clean. No anger, I whispered to myself. Just strategy. I gripped the handle. I turned it. The mechanism released with a heavy clunk. I pushed the door open. The heavy mahogany doors swung open with a groan that sounded like a coffin lid being lifted. I stepped inside. The conversation in the boardroom died instantly. Lawson Pike was standing at the head of the table, his face flushed, a vein throbbing in his temple. Tyler Crane was sitting to his right, looking pale and jittery. Around the table sat the board of directors, men and women in expensive suits who looked like they were attending a funeral for their own portfolios. I did not stop. I walked the length of the room, the sound of my heels striking the hardwood floor like a metronome counting down the seconds. I walked past the lawyer. I walked past the representative from Redridge. I pulled out the empty chair at the far end of the table, directly opposite Lawson. I sat down. Then, I lifted my mother's cognac leather bag and placed it on the polished wood. It landed with a heavy, solid thud that echoed in the silence. Lawson stared at me. His eyes bulged. For a moment, he was too stunned to speak. Then, the rage took over. "Get out!" Lawson roared, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "Who let you in here? You are fired." "Alice, I want security up here now. You are violating a closed executive session." I leaned back in the leather chair. I crossed my legs. I looked him in the eye. "You can fire an employee." "Lawson," I said, my voice calm and projecting clearly to every corner of the room. "But we are not here to talk about employees today. We are here to talk about shareholders." I reached into the bag. I pulled out the blue folder. I slid it across the long table. It spun perfectly, coming to a rest right in front of the company's general counsel, a man named Sterling who had signed off on every questionable bonus Lawson had ever taken. "Open it, Sterling," I said. Lawson slammed his hand on the table. "Do not touch that. She is insane. She is a disgruntled low-level analyst having a breakdown." Sterling hesitated. He looked at Lawson. Then he looked at me. He saw the suit. He saw the red lipstick. He saw the absolute, terrifying lack of fear in my eyes. Sterling opened the folder. The room watched in silence as he turned the pages. His eyes scanned the header of the Red Ridge transfer agreement. He flipped to the proxy forms from Arthur Holloway. He checked the Granite Harbor block purchase confirmation. The color drained from Sterling's face. He looked like he had just swallowed glass. "Well," Lawson barked. "What is that trash?" Sterling looked up. His voice was a whisper. "It is a consolidation of voting rights." Lawson laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "Consolidation from who, her? She makes $80,000 a year. She drives a 10-year-old Honda Sterling swallowed hard. It lists the beneficial owner of the aggregated blocks from Granite Harbor, North Axis, Redridge Partners, and the Class B preferred shares. The total voting equity is 51.2%. He paused, looking at Lawson with pity. "The controlling shareholder is Alice Hughes." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush lungs. Tyler dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the floor. Lawson's face went white, then purple. "That is a lie," he spat. "This is a joke, a forgery. You do not have that kind of capital. You are a ghost." I smiled. I pointed a finger at the cognac bag sitting on the table between us. "You made a mistake, Lawson," I said softly. "You judged my net worth by the age of my handbag. You assumed that because I do not wear logos, I do not have liquidity. You forgot that the wealthiest people in the room are usually the ones who do not feel the need to sparkle." Lawson looked at the bag his wife had mocked, the bag Tyler had laughed at. He looked at it like it was a bomb. "I am going to sue you," Lawson hissed, leaning over the table. "I will tie this up in court for years. I will prove you stole confidential data to manipulate the stock price. You will go to prison." "Alice." I reached into the folder again. I pulled out the single sheet of cream-colored stationery. You can try. Lawson. But before you do, I think the board should hear from the man who actually built this company. I held up the letter from Elliot Grayson. Elliot wrote this to me before he died. I said, he warned me that one day, your vanity would outgrow your competence. He told me that when you forgot who laid the foundation of this house, I should be the one to remind you. I tossed the letter onto the center of the table. This is not a hostile takeover. Lawson, this is a correction. I sat up straight. The time for speeches was over. It was time for the execution. I officially call this meeting to order. I said, as the majority shareholder, I have 3 motions to present. First, I move for the immediate removal of Lawson Pike as CEO and Tyler Crane as Vice President of Strategy, effective this minute, for cause, specifically, for gross mismanagement of liquidity and the unauthorized attempted sale of core assets. Tyler jumped up. You cannot do that, he screamed, his voice cracking. We were saving the company. You are destroying it. Sit down. Tyler, I said, without looking at him. Second, I continued, I move to establish an independent special committee to investigate all financial transfers to Caravel K and to recover any misappropriated funds. Lawson flinched as if I had slapped him. Third, I move to appoint Sarah Jenkins from operations as interim CEO. She has been running the actual business for 5 years while you two were playing golf. I looked around the table. Do I have a second? The room was frozen. Then, slowly, the representative from Redridge raised his hand. I second the motion, he said quietly. Sterling, the lawyer, looked at the papers again. He looked at the 51%. He raised his hand. I vote in favor, Sterling said, one by one. The hands went up. The board members who had toasted Lawson at the gala, the people who had laughed at his jokes, the people who had ignored me for a decade, they all raised their hands. They were survivors. They knew the king was dead. Motion carries. I said, I looked at Lawson. Please vacate the chair. Lawson. Lawson stood up. He looked small. The swagger was gone. The tan looked orange under the fluorescent lights. He looked around the room, waiting for someone to save him. But no one met his eyes. He grabbed his phone. He grabbed a small cardboard box of personal items he had brought in, just in case. He walked down the length of the table. He had to walk past me to get to the door. He stopped next to my chair. He looked down at the cognac bag. You ruined everything, he whispered. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. The problem with you, Lawson, is that you never understood risk. I said, you always thought you owned the house. You forgot that I was the one buying the bricks, one by one, from the people you insulted. He opened his mouth to speak, but found nothing to say. He turned and walked out the door. Tyler scrambled after him, clutching his tablet like a life preserver, looking terrified. The door closed. I let out a breath I had been holding for 17 years. The room was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of respect. Bianca was waiting in the hallway when I walked out 10 minutes later. She watched Lawson get into the elevator. His head hung low. She turned to me. Her face was a mask of hatred. You are a monster, she whispered. I stopped. I adjusted the strap of my mother's bag on my shoulder. No, Bianca, I said, I am a strategist. A monster destroys things for fun. I just balanced the balance sheet, for the company, and for everyone he forgot. I walked past her. I did not take the CEO office. I did not want it. I took the role of chairman of the board. I gave the corner office to Sarah, the woman who knew the names of every employee's children. I walked across the trading floor. The screens were still flashing, but the panic was subsiding. An email was hitting the inboxes of every employee. Subject restructuring. Leadership change. I saw people reading it. I saw heads turn. I saw them looking at me, really looking at me. For the first time, they did not see a ghost. They saw the boss. I walked to the exit. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the crisp Chicago air. The sun was shining. They mocked my mother's bag because it was ancient. But ancient does not mean worthless. It just means they have not been in the game long enough to know the real price. And when you finally understand the real price of an asset, of a person, of yourself, you do not ask for a seat. You buy the table. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed seeing Alice take down the corporate giants, make sure to subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.